Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Morning.
Yes. Hey, Dr. Carr, how you doing?
Hello, Professor Hunter. I'm fine. How are you?
I am awesome. It's been a while since I've seen your amazing face.
The same here. I miss you, although I see all the clips on YouTube. You've been talking to all these authors and folks that are making change, and it's a remarkable conversation. And I'm glad that momentum empties into Saturdays now, and most importantly, on narrative.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for joining up.
God bless. We're about to do some things I'm going to talk about in a second, but we got to have balance too. So I was watching while I was in the sauna. I'm still sweating. Ted Lasso, and just as a reminder that the pressure that we apply on people to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter about a person's quote unquote race, because we know race is a made up construct. So it's important that we have all of the people come in with pro history, pro fact, it doesn't matter where you come from. We just got to be committed to telling the truth always. So the last episode of Ted Lasso, there's a Nigerian soccer player, football player, and he was being sponsored by an airline that had oil connections that were raping Nigeria. So his father was like, you're an embarrassment. And then he was like, I didn't know. So he taped over the sponsor, and the sponsor threatened, of course, to pull out, and it's the biggest sponsor. But it speaks to the corruption in Nigeria. I mean, it was like all in this episode, corruption in Nigeria. And I was just reminded that we all have to do our parts. No longer can we say, well, Republicans buy sneakers too. We have to mindful that.
Remember that?
Yeah. And then this episode is a Christmas episode. I'm sorry, I just finished watching it. And so he's coming over to white guy's house for Christmas, and he was like, how do you see Christmas in your, how do they celebrate Christmas, in your country? He said, how do you see Christmas as colonizers? So he's a colonization. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, Ted Lasso.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where we are.
Can you imagine a white man coming down your chimney and not getting shot or arrested for breaking and entering?
Come on now.
As the great Naeem Akbar used to say many years ago, the psychologist and Professor Naeem Akbar, he said, it must be quite a head trip they put on black people to have you work every day of the year and then tell your children that a white man brought them their gifts. You paid for all those gifts under the tree, and then you told your children a white man gave it to them.
How powerful is that, though? Which is why the narrative is so important that we get it right, because we all grew up with the myth, but that's what we're here to talk about. I wanted to first of all say thank you. This is the 75th episode, which
75.
It's ordained by God when we land on the live episode number 75, which is also kind of a landmark episode that we've reached. And it's amazing the last couple of years us doing this year and change, just the growth and the team and the people that are coming. And we are launching a social media platform next month, and we already have the beta. So we have a couple hundred people in already, but you have to be a narrative subscriber to be a part of it.
Yes. And I sent my first communique. Quite impressive, Professor Hunter. And not quite ready to tell people the name, huh?
No, well, I'm going to tell you what the name is. You can't find it unless you are part of narrative. So it's called Nubia. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's quite impressive.
Yes, we're in Nubia. But I find myself, Dr. Carr, being on social media, we have to, I don't know if you are, but I'm guarded. Like I'm thinking, like, I'll write a tweet. We're doing drops in Nubia. Y'all could tweet wherever you are. We're going to drop some gems.
Leave the birds alone, because in the Nile Valley where Nubia is, those the birds that stand in the Nile, in the ibis family, that is the parent bird for the concept of Jehudi, which is the creator of writing. So we couldn't go with Tweeter. That little bird is that little bird is much too small for what we doing.
Come on.
So we're dropping in Nubia.
We dropping. And I find myself still guarded, like I know it's our face, we can do whatever we want. And I'm like, who could see this? Like on Twitter, I'll write something and then I'll sit with it for a minute. I don't just tweet recklessly, because everybody's watching. You can get canceled, you can get thrown off the platform. We can't get thrown off, and I'm still like, oh, wait a minute, let me. I'm still finding my way, finding my footing. It's weird to be free. Like I bet the first days of freedom, people still had that bondage mentality. So I'm still working through it. I just want to confess that.
We are. In fact, we should mention when you mentioned that think of those images of those first days of coming out of enslavement in the United States. The two of the children's books authors who we've raised one more than the other as an illustrator, but we know that in the last week, the great Eloise Greenfield, who was actually here in the Washington, D.C. area, made transition. So many books. Her children's book on Paul Robeson is in here somewhere, but she's done so many. And then, of course, the great illustrator who we've talked about several times, Floyd Cooper, who did those more recent books on Tulsa and everything. But I'm thinking about when you said those first days of freedom, I was looking at one of his children's books on the Black folk who built the White House, and his technique communicating the sense of not just, I don't want to use the word dignity, because that is, all life has dignity. Like Dr. King said, all work has dignity. So the humanity of our people. And imagine that moment when you received the news that those people who have you captive up there in that house don't have you captive anymore, or at least that's what you're told. I think it's probably disbelief. There's a sense of, yeah, okay, so who's going to enforce this? And for some people, it was like, oh, cool, I'm out. And we see all those things represented and the full range. So yeah, I think those first steps in narrative with Nubia now completely, constructed so that we can have conversations with each other. And that beautiful, beautiful phrase, self-determining, owned, we own. You say you can't cancel us. The bots, you're not coming in here. Now, everyone can join, of course, but you got to join to be in the conversation. Yeah, the first steps are going to be like, really? Can we? No, really? Can we? Yeah, you can. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's a little scary, because with freedom comes responsibility.
Right.
So I don't mean be reckless. It means govern yourself. It's so funny. I was having a conversation with one of my former students who is just a brilliant scholar, for our own educator, builder. And we were having a conversation, and the concept of Ifa came up, the Yoruba tradition. And the idea is that, there's not a concept. We don't articulate reality in terms of good and evil. We articulate it perhaps in terms of light and darkness, ones and twos. If you're in the Odu Ifa, that one stroke representing one side of the calorie, two representing the other side, the concave and the convex sides of the calorie. But the long story short is, there is always chaos in the world. Now, the ancient Egyptians might not call it chaos. They may call it isfet. And in fact, chaos is not really a good word. What it means is that the forces that exist. The question always is, how do you live with them, react to them, interact with them? And so it's always on us. That's where Iwa, the question of character, comes in. What is your character? And you this morning, as I was sitting here reading, thinking about some things, you reached out and said, okay, we got to put this front and center in our conversation this morning, because this happened in the wee hours of today. And it's an example of the Yoruba people and many African ways of knowing, in terms of that category in our African states conceptual categories, would say, you can't stop these things from happening. The only thing you can do is control what you do. So whether it's dropping on Nubia or reacting like our kin are doing in the Caribbean Sea, what you can do is what you can do. The rest of it is going to happen whether you interact with it or not. So what's going on down there?
An earthquake, and I didn't drop. I should have dropped though.
Well, we could treat and drop, but yeah, dropping increasingly is getting as more and more people joining up. But yeah.
So what Haiti woke up to, a 7.1 on the Richter scale earthquake, devastation, and you think like you talk about this chaos, but there's something spiritual too, and I'm not sure, how to, articulate what is happening, because it shares space with the Dominican Republic. And there were a couple of people that came on my timeline from the DR, and it was like, we felt tremors, but not that. But it's the same landmass.
Mm-hmm.
So why does this keep happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, if there's some sort of universal, maybe whatever was summoned to freedom. I don't know, Dr. Carr. And I don't know. This is had a conversation, but it should be had, but perhaps not here.
No, yeah, well, not here, maybe completely, but you can't stop it. I mean, at the end of the day, it can't be stopped. I mean, and I think there is something to the the geography of that island, of the high place as Haiti comes from. The island that the Spanish and the social structure and their social structure are called Hispaniola. There's something for that. I mean, the crimes against humanity that were created on that island against the indigenous people of the region, the Taino, the Arawak, the Carib people, the brutal ongoing crime against humanity called enslavement and its afterlives. There's a bill to pay for that. And then the question becomes, well, why do we have to suffer? Well, we have to suffer because we're here. You can't avoid suffering in life. The question is, how do you deal with it? And, I remember many years ago in a book, Lewis Gordon, the philosopher, edited called Existence in Black, Paget Henry, philosopher, at that time at Brown University, wrote an article where he talked about how this Western way of knowing, what I'm calling way of knowing, what he might say worldview or world sense, in Western style Christianity, will introduce this notion that there's good and evil, and if you don't do what we say, we will condemn you to burn in hell forever. And once you instill that in the mind, not of the Africans who you enslaved initially, and not perhaps of their children, but as generations are born into that system without having that momentum of memory, they begin to adapt to that way of knowing and worry about, they come, as they say in the Bible, they come running saying, what must I do to be saved? That's because you've set up an impossible choice. And you set yourself up as the power. Now in Haiti, I think it's a little different. When you see Vodun, and as the old joke goes in Haiti, Haitians are 99% Catholic and 100% Vodun. Why? Because those ways of knowing are all there. They're just coming. The people have become quite flexible and adaptive. And as Jacob Carruthers talks about the irritated genie, or Wade Nobles talks about the island of memes, the idea is that whatever this trauma, whether it be natural disaster, whether it be constant interference, whether it be Black folk in that governance structure, the Haitian governance structure, struggling to throw off oppression and try to build something while they're being attacked, and there's been an unceasing attack. That's why Randall Robinson wrote his book, An Unbroken Agony, because there's been an unbroken assault on Haiti. What you see, though, is that out of that, the character of the Haitian people is a remarkable example in human history of resilience, of determination. And that earthquake, if it's a 7.1, and that's what the early reports seem to indicate, then that's a more intense earthquake than the one in 2010. And, the one in 2010, of course, we know that there were 220 to 300,000 people who were killed, 1.5 million people injured, another 1.5 million left unhoused. But we understand that in the countryside, that it wasn't as devastating as in the cities. And this one that hit today, about 100 miles out of Port-au-Prince, we see that while that is a natural phenomenon, we also understand that the Prime Minister of Haiti right now, Ariel Henry, is handpicked by, what do they call it, the core group. I love how the social structure likes to narrate itself. Who was the core group who vetted and said, yeah, we want this guy instead of the other guy? The United States, Canada, Brazil, Spain, France, the European Union, and the United Nations, and the Organization of American States. Now, meanwhile, the African Union, with all its flaws, had debated and considered perhaps extending a form of membership to Haiti years ago, but the AU ain't at the table. You don't see Africans in it. Now, all the people on the island were snatched there from Africa, but you got them being dictated to by these white boys and their clients, like the Organization of American States. But why is that important? Ariel Henry, who is the prime minister now, he was the guy over public health during the cholera outbreak that they had, where they lost 10,000 people lost their lives, another 800,000 got infected, and he was the public health guy in charge in the earthquake. And he was very close to Moise, the assassinated president. So what you have in Haiti is when this earthquake hits, you got the challenges that Haiti has because of the constant interference, meaning what? Faults and hazards maps. They have them now since 2010 because they've been trying to ramp up some form of being able to anticipate where these things might hit and where they might hit and where they may not hit. The University of Haiti graduated its first classes of Haitians who have masters in geology, because you got to have an indigenous group of scientists who can begin to track and look at these things. But in terms of, there's no national disaster plan. because the government has been basically eviscerated and destroyed. And in terms of earthquake resistant building, according to the scientists and folks and administrators, folks who have studied this, up to 90% of the buildings in Haiti don't meet any form of earthquake standards. Well, you don't have a government who can inspect or enforce inspections. And the budget of the Bureau of Mines and Energy, that's where geology is housed in Haiti, in terms of the government, is roughly speaking around just a little over $600,000, and over 80% of that is in salaries, meaning they're unfunded. But how do you build that back? Well, they just postponed elections. We just got that news in the last few days. They say they're going to postpone to November 7th. This earthquake may push it back even further. And that's presidential and parliament elections for the legislature. Because remember, there's no legislature in Haiti. That was before Moise got killed. And then they're going to have a constitutional referendum. What's going on in Haiti is what Naomi Klein and others would call disaster capitalism. This is another moment, another earthquake. Remember, after that last earthquake, here come Bill Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, Hillary Clinton, and them. That money's still sitting in somebody's pocket, earning interest or in stocks or wherever, hasn't been rolled out to build any of this infrastructure. And then you put a guy like Ariel Henry, a medical doctor who was trained in France and the United States, went to Boston University, close to Moise, and vetted by this core group, and also part of an informal group called the Council of Sages. After they took out Aristide again in 2004, this guy was part of a group of people who ain't nobody elect, who's in constant conversation with these external forces. And is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? As John Henry Clark say, in some stories, it ain't no good guys. It ain't no bad guys. It's just complex human beings. We want to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about Brother Loeb. But in the case of Haiti right now, this natural event, this shock wave, literal, that's been sent through with a 7.1 and then a 5.2 aftershock right after it. This is one more disturbance that the Haitian people will demonstrate their character again, their resiliency, and perhaps it will interfere with the best laid plans of these disaster capitalists. But one thing's for sure, we can't allow ourselves to turn away from Haiti. We can't allow ourselves to not be connected, not be aware, not act when we are informed. And we certainly can't allow ourselves to turn on white-facing mass commercial entertainment media and look at image after image of people suffering and crying and think to ourselves, oh, we must do something. And then look and see people saying, we're going to pledge this money, we're going to bring this in. No, what's your non-government organization? What's your NGO? If the United States government getting involved, what you going to do? People say, well, you pay tax dollars. That means you need to inquire what is going to be done to help the Haitian people who have been interfered with since they declared that they are not going to be enslaved anymore in August 1791, Black August. So it's a crazy way to begin our conversation today.
It is, but important. I mean, we talked early, and as soon as we got off the phone, I was like, what? What is going on? Because we were going to have a conversation about journalism, which we will. There's the Taliban. I'm going to blame you for this.
What?
Because I can't watch anything anymore. Not a documentary, not a movie. I can't wait to watch Aretha Franklin when it comes out on streaming, because I'm not going to the movies with Lambda, Delta, Zeta, all the other.
I know that.
I'll go ahead with that. I'm not going out in the streets, but I'm looking forward, because I'm like, oh, Audra McDonald. It looks amazing.
Yeah, that's good cast.
But everything I'm like, is this right? Is this true? Is this real? So
we know that's not. We know it's not.
The Taliban is raging. We pulled out our troops, but I was like, should we have been there in the first place? And why did we go? It's just so many questions I have, and then are we getting the right news? Because, we know during World War II, now it's come out, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Black journalists were the ones that said, this is a crime against humanity. Black journalists were the ones that said, what we just did to those folk in Japan was inhumane and horrible, because America and the New York Times were saying, oh, this was humane, and, they died a peaceful death. It was Black people that said, no, that's not what happened. So I'm going to need some Black folk to tell us what's really going on in the Middle East, or whatever we call Africa.
Yes.
So now I'm popping out.
No, don't go anywhere, because you know, as Clark said, in some stories there ain't no good guys. So, you know, I think back many years. I guess it's been 20 years ago almost. Immortal Technique and Most Def and Chuck D and KRS-One did a remix called the Bin Laden remix, and the loop was Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you. Tell the truth. Bush knocked down the towers. It was you. And then and Immortal Technique is on the track, and when they come in, you know, it's like one of the lines is Bin Laden was a CIA tactician. Remember Bin Laden coming out of Afghanistan, fighting Russia. In many ways, you know, the colloquial phrase used to be that Afghanistan is Russia's Vietnam. You get bogged down in a proxy war, and you can't defeat these folk because they're fighting for a way of knowing that they've embraced, and you're fighting for political reasons. And so you got to kill all of them, and unless you're willing to kill them or do what only the United States has done to date in human history, which is explode a nuclear device on them. And the United States did it not once, but twice, and they didn't do it on white people. No bombing of Dresden or Berlin or, you know, any of those things. You know, they go drop on Japanese 2 times. But, you know, you're bogged down, and the United States saw very much value in doing that. And so, interesting enough, that Bin Laden remix, I think about it because what they do in it, what these hip hop artists do, is flip it on its head, and they say, you know, if another party invaded the hood tonight, there will be warfare from Harlem to the Heights. And he said we would turn it into a Colombian jungle. There'd be war in the swamps of Louisiana. In other words, if you attack the people in their home, they're going to fight you back. Now, does that mean that they want to live under the type of concept of Islam, the version of Islam that is grouped around the Taliban? No, but it does mean they don't want to be oppressed. And when you look at the history of Afghanistan and you look at the proxy wars that have been fought there, those people have been under perpetual assault from different people with different ideas about a number of things. But we know, and Joe Biden, I was reading today's New York Times, over 15 cities slip out of the grasp of Afghan forces. And it's interesting because one of the things that you hear the United States now saying, of course, they're going to withdraw 20 years, over $1 trillion going into the pockets of a number of different people, including private security and private entities. You know, with Trump's defeat a few months ago, you saw the deposing of Betsy DeVos as the Secretary of Education, but her brother is the founder of what used to be known as Blackwater. You know, all them millions of dollars of contracts that flowed into Eric, whatever his last name is, first name is Eric, I remember that, his pockets and the pockets of other contractors, including those across the river here at the Carlyle Group in Northern Virginia. So the idea then that there are good and bad guys in Afghanistan is difficult. Remember everybody holding up the little stained finger after they voted the first president of Afghanistan that was brought in after the United States imposed itself on Afghanistan. And again, all this time, Bin Laden is not in, because the alleged reason to invade was, of course, chasing Bin Laden and looking at client states. And of course, they skipped over to Iraq whole time, or much of the time. The man is in Pakistan, but they also have the bomb. So you really can't just really roll up on Pakistan like that. So, you know, eventually you go get the guy. But, you know, who knows how long anyone knew where Bin Laden was or wasn't. But the fact of the matter is, as Chris Hedges, I think it was Chris Hedges, wrote the little book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. The idea of war and warfare is one of the organizational logics. In fact, perhaps the central organizational logic of the modern world system. Not just military warfare, economic warfare. Some people will call capitalism economic warfare. You take as much as you can and damn any concern for anyone else. Profit. Well, in military, unlike warfare in many cultures in the world, because there's always been conflict, but, you know, warfare might mean you pick your 10 best or your 20 best or your 30 best warriors. I'll pick my 10, 20, 30 best. They're in contest with each other. And after that, whoever wins, okay, your side won. But no, this whole concept of putting everybody on the field and launching them at everybody on the other side, you know, that's a form of barbarism that requires you almost to demonize your opponent, to dehumanize them. And so when we read the narratives in the Western newspapers, they're looking for good guys and bad guys because that's the kind of thing people want. That's the thing people have been trained to want, to consume. Black and white, good and bad, all this kind of thing. And so it puts a us versus them. And of course, there is no us, like there is no we. And say, well, we invaded Afghanistan. Did you go? Now, the irony is that's probably a truer we, a closer to accurate we than many other we's, because the people who are doing the shooting look closer to you and me. Disproportionately black and brown people, and people who are low down in the class structure, who are using military service as a way to try to advance themselves and their families and their communities. And then they're forced halfway around the world to fight people who they couldn't tell you who the sides are. They just know they shooting. Made you look. You're a slave to a page in my rhyme book. That's who's got the rhyme book is the government's, is the United States government. So they send you to Iraq. They shooting. Made you look. Yeah, you're a slave to a page in my rhyme book called the New York Times. Or for that matter, you go, well, I'll come back to this in a second. But yeah. Look at this. Thousands of U.S. troops head back to Kabul. This is from yesterday's Washington Post. Americans, local allies to be extricated. When I read that headline and then read the article, in the back of my mind, I keep thinking Vietnam, because look at what happened, right? And the reason I say I'm gonna stop, because the other thing on the cover of the Washington Post was the map showing demographic changes that will be reflected in the numbers that the census let out. And you can see there at the bottom, the headline from the Post was first drop in U.S. white population.
Wait, hold on. Wait.
No, I mean, we'll come to the census in a minute. Now he's the first drop in U.S. That's all right.
Don't say nothing. Wait,
no,
hold on. Woo. All right. So, it's interesting as you're talking. I had the pleasure of interviewing Barbara Lee yesterday.
Yes.
We did a pre-tape for my radio show. And she, when I look at the vote, and this is like 4 days after 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about character, and you talk about, somebody who stood up and against everybody. Was the one. We're talking about 600 Congress people. 600 Congress people, the entire Senate, all voted to go to war and give this president at the time, or all presidents, power to do whatever they wanted. This one woman stood against that. And everyone, she said, calling her, John Lewis, Clyburn, everyone saying, no, you got to go with it. We got to be unified. And she was like, this is wrong. It's wrong morally, and I cannot stand up and give, because she saw around the corner.
That's right.
And what you're doing every Saturday and every day that we commune and narrative is making sure we have the tools to know what's right and wrong, what's truth and not. And also you press us to have conviction and character to do the right thing in the midst of it. At least you do that for me. So I just want to pause in a moment. May we all have the same courage that a Barbara Lee has to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is wrong. So I just wanted to, as you talk about Vietnam, we needed more people like Barbara Lee to say this is wrong. This
is wrong. Well, it's interesting you say that, Prof, because first of all, that's going to be a hell of an interview for us to hear. Second of all, politicians are not our friends. They're politicians. And I think Barbara Lee reflects that. Well, all politicians reflect it. All elected officials reflect it. And the reason I say that is because, yes, she is an individual. When you look at Barbara Lee's history, you look at the Bay Area, you look at her work in public health, look at her work in community as an organizer, as someone who worked, and I don't like the word grassroots as much as community, but you also look at the person who preceded her in that seat, Ron Dellums, and you realize the anti-apartheid movement, Dellums himself coming out against war during the Vietnam era, coming out against the United States official policy in South Africa, which was apartheid. Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Masa Sulu. I mean, they're on terrorist watch lists because, while you got cowboys like Dick Cheney, this lone congressman out of Wyoming, who is sitting in Congress voting for the African National Congress to be considered a terrorist organization, you got Ron Dellums fighting back. And that doesn't mean everybody in the Congressional Black Caucus fought back at the time. More of them fought back then than perhaps would now. And that actually ties to what we'll talk about in a minute with Charles Loeb. I mean, it's fascinating fascinating conversation that we're going to have about that. But Barbara Lee represents not just Barbara Lee. She represents the people in her district and the sentiment that she came out of, the community in other words, the governance structure she came out of. Even Ron Dellums himself, his father was a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Chambermaids. In fact, there's a book around here somewhere, I couldn't put my finger on it right now, about the history of that first Black labor union in the Bay Area and how, is it C.M. Dellums? I had to look his name up, but was one of the founders. I mean, so there's a tradition of working class struggle. There's a tradition of Black struggle in the Bay Area. And of course, so when we think about the current Vice President of the United States, we certainly have to reflect on the fact that her own mother, Shaimala Gopalan, and thank you, Karen, C.L. Dellums. Yes. And she was touched by that working class and that Black and brown organizing tradition when she came to the United States to go to school at Cal Berkeley, as did her father, Donald Harris, an economist who took some of that sentiment along with his training as an economist back to Jamaica, certainly in terms of writing about what kind of progressive politics had to be engaged in, at least when it comes to retooling the economy. So Barbara Lee, when we see Barbara Lee, we often think of politicians the way we think of movie actors or comic book villains and heroes. In other words, we think about them acting solely as individual actors. But Barbara Lee's character is emboldened, supported by, in fact, the fact that the people in her community, including those who vote for her, insulate her from the type of weakness that many politicians who rely on let's just say perhaps a little bit more diffused sentiment from people in their districts, and therefore have to rely more on things like dark money. Jane Mayer just wrote a very interesting piece on the 2024 elections and 2022 elections and how a lot of this dark money is coming in already, just moving. When you see these politicians talking, a lot of times it's the funders. And so Barbara Lee, to what you raised, by herself, as these people were bunched up on the steps of the U.S. Capitol singing "God Bless America," and I mean, come on, man, come on, really? But she stood against. But that district has a history of doing that. And so here we are in 2021. Here we are, folk. It's not Saigon, it's Kabul, and the troops ain't leaving out of Saigon; they're leaving out of Kabul. And so, what's going to happen? What's already happening? And you read it in the papers. And you remember, everybody knew the Taliban was going to take over Afghanistan because in some places they never released control. Other places they've reclaimed. The only question was how long it was going to take. And now the so-called fourth estate, which is what they call the press, is saying that the government says that, oh, we didn't realize it would be so soon. You've been there 20 years. You spent $1 trillion. You knew. And in 2 years, 6 months, 5 years, 20 years, 100 years, if there's still human beings on the planet, because the way this global warming is going, the ball may reset and get rid of this species. But when the report drops that they knew exactly when, remember down Ellsworth and the Pentagon Papers in the New York Times, well, then people are going, we won't be around, but somebody else said, well, they did know. Well, you could have said that on August the 14th, 2021, if you've been paying attention to the rhythms of history. Of course they know. Of course they know. The question always is what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So I can't wait to hear that Barbara Lee interview. But let's talk about this in the context of, we're going back to school, and y'all please be careful. The K-12 folks are already back. The first wave of freshmen have already moved in to many campuses around the country, including the one where I work, Howard University. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of trepidation, there's a lot of nervousness, certainly among those who teach them. If you are a teacher anywhere in the world, but especially since we're here located in the United States and we're talking from the US, thinking about, whether you've got these rogue white nationalist governors like the one in Texas or Florida, you get vaccinated, you protect yourself, and whether you're on a local school board, elections matter. So people say, well, they're all the same. No, they're not all the same. People run for school boards too. And one of the strategies of the white nationalists over the last number of years is to take over school boards. In fact, we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff in a minute. So even when some of their children are not in the school boards, not in public schools, but we have to, as we are protecting ourselves, we realize that we are going back into an education system that isn't the same as it was last spring. We're going back into a space that has been forever changed. And in some states, like Oregon, for example, they have passed a piece of legislation that the governor signed last week that is leaving the determination of whether or not students have met the state standards exclusively for the next 3 years as they rework the state standards. They left the decision exclusively to the local school boards and to the local school districts, rather. And that's important. You got some in the white nationalist party out there, the Republican Party, who are saying, oh, no, you're taking away all the standards. No, what they're trying to do is manage the fact that across this country, and Oregon is no different, you had hundreds of thousands, millions of children that disappeared. Either they never had the technology at their houses to go online to engage in remote learning, or if they had access to some form of technology to nominally be, quote unquote, in class, they still had to deal with the fact that the place they were logging in from might not have stable internet access, might be not have stable living conditions, might be in a situation where somebody has contracted COVID. Because remember, the people who are at the bottom of the working class, the poor people who work every day trying to just scrape through, never stopped working outside their houses. They didn't have option for work from home. This is DoorDash. This is Uber. This is Amazon warehouse. This is all the people who never had the option to stay home. So you got children who are literally hanging on by their fingernails. So in Oregon, they're trying to put something in place to say, well, whether you determine whether or not they go to the next grade until we can figure out how to build something different and catch up to these standards, we're going to leave that to the local school boards to make that decision, the local school districts. That's something that's being done on the fly. So as we're going back to school, and here we are in class, and as narrative continues to grow and more people join, and if you all are paying attention to any social media, the comments, even we're here on Saturdays, you look on Twitter, and now when you come into narrative, you'll see it in Nubia, you'll soon see it in Nubia. The people are really being revived in terms of this tradition of deep thinking, reading, discussing. And so as we are here, and you're writing your syllabus, Prof, I'm writing my syllabus, and I've got my stuff open. We are very excited. We settled on our book for the College of Arts and Sciences. Howard, we do a book every year for our freshman seminar class. I've been charged with co-leading that with Dr. Dana Williams for the last, I think the first time I got involved in it was in the early 2000s. And then the then dean of the College of Arts and Sciences restructured it probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And so I just brought all that learning and experience from the teenagers and their teachers, who I've been blessed for the last 22 years now, Philadelphia Freedom Schools, right into that freshman seminar. And we established a common text. And we've had every text we've read where somebody was alive who wrote the book, we've had them come. So Wole Soyinka, he came when we read his book of Africa. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o, when we read his book, Something Torn and New, came and spent time with us. Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi, of course, went to Howard. And we had, I said, we'll read this. And we had already scheduled it. And he told the world he wanted to launch the book from Howard. So the first public conversation around the book in terms of a formal launch came at the height of the middle of the semester of our freshman seminar course. Very important. Barracoon, Zora Neale Hurston, that book, we read that. And of course, she's an ancestor, but Deborah Plant, who brought the manuscript out, actually came. And so we've done that. Citizen, book of poetry and prose by a sister poet. Her name will come to me in a minute. She came. And so this year, we settled on this book edited by Teresa Perry Joan Wynn, Ernesto Cortez, Lisa Delpit, and a new ancestor, Bob Moses. Quality education as a constitutional right. Should high quality education be a constitutional right? Should there be an amendment in the Constitution guaranteeing all children in this society a high quality education, public education? Now, we're going to have that conversation with our 18 and 19-year-olds in the freshman seminar this semester at Howard in the College of Arts and Sciences. And not just about children, their young people their age or children younger than them, but everyone. Adult education. What does it mean to be educated? What does it mean to learn? So as we're talking about going back to school, what Narrative is doing and what we're doing on Saturdays, building into that, we're all going back to school, all of us. And as we're reading, as we're talking, as we're thinking, we are redefining public education. Public, not private education. In fact, as we go through this book week by week at Howard, we're surrounding it with all kind of other materials, because we understand that when I say there is no we in this country, what I'm saying is that there is no common culture. Yeah, there's a flag. Yeah, there's some anthems. Yeah, there's a notion of everybody speak English, but that's a notion. It's not a requirement. And there's no common national narrative, no common national memory. So when we think about that, we understand that the idea, the assault on apartheid in America, which we call Jim Crow in this social structure, we call it Jim Crow, resulted in many people who said, we are not part of your we. We want our own we, and we resent the idea of a we that we associate with America being also associated with you. So we resist, we pull out. And so this is a recent book by Steve Sweets called Overturning Brown, The Segregationist Legacy of the Modern School Choice Movement. And it's interesting because in this book that we're reading at Howard, Quality Education as a Constitutional Right, and this is a book, of course, that I encourage you all to get this, because it opens. Bob Moses asked a number of educators to gather and had a conversation about what would a quality education look like. And he made that call. I'll just go to the beginning, Teresa Perry's lead article. March 11, 2005, they came from all over to have this conversation, and people started debating. So one of the first things that she quotes says somebody said, well, if the privileged can have a choice, so should Black people. That's why I support vouchers and charters. Somebody else said charter schools will save public education. Somebody else said charters are an attempt to privatize public education. Somebody else said charter schools outperform regular public schools because they have a self-selected group of students. Somebody else said money won't solve anything. Just look how poorly Black and brown students perform in schools that are well financed. Somebody else said let's scrap No Child Left Behind. There were all kind of debates. But one thing is for sure, when you say public education, you're talking about education that everyone theoretically should be able to access, and you should have a minimum standard. And what Bob Moses is saying, that minimum standard, that foundation should be high. It doesn't matter where you go to school, it should be high. Can it be higher other places, some places and other places? Can people who can afford to raise the money weaponize their PTA and have all kind of stuff, flying cars and time machines in their school? You can't stop that. If you got the resources, do it. But everybody should have a minimum level. But what you see in this book, Overturning Brown, is, and Sweets does an incredible job of this. He's a very interesting guy. He traces how, after Brown, the white nationalists went for school choice and vouchers and started talking about them as segregationist tools and used them to escape, quote unquote, the public schools. And so it's and he's got all kind of, he goes through the history of it from the 50s through to today. And what we're seeing is that if you're not willing to commit to the public good, then you're not part of the we. Now, the problem becomes when you then try to take over the mechanisms that influence the other people who are willing to do something different in the interest of the public good. And that's where the census comes in. I'm gonna spend 5 minutes on this and we'll keep going. It's very important because, again, we're going back to school, right? So, like I said, the Washington Post has these demographic changes. And soon we know by the middle of this century, we know that white people in this country will be the largest minority group in the country. We have to think about this differently. So people saying, okay, well, the day is coming when white people will be the minority. No, they'll be the largest minority group in the country. It lost about 10% since the last census. And that's with all the chicanery around the census that took place under the white nationalist administration of Donald John Trump and his friends. But what is clear with this census, these census numbers, no matter how we were talking about undercounts, it's going to be undercounts, there's all kind of stuff that's going on. But what we are facing is a situation where white nationalist policymakers at the state level in particular, aided and abetted at the federal level by a handful of lawmakers who are heavily funded, at least in one case, Senator Manchin out of West Virginia, by a lot of this money that is interested in preserving what I'm about to say, are really trying to create, I call it a neo-Rhodesia. It's a neo-Rhodesia model. In other words, white minority rule. And the white minority rule, meaning that, yes, we might have had the numbers in this country to control federal policymaking. We might have had numbers at the state level to control state policymaking. But if we can gerrymander, in other words, if we can draw electoral districts in a way to maintain some form of control, we are more than happy to have white minority rule in Texas, white minority rule in Florida, white minority rule in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Georgia, white minority rule at the city council level at some of these other places. Now, pause and realize that politicians aren't our friends. That if you want somebody to look closer to a Barbara Lee, or even beyond a Barbara Lee, then you're going to have to surround them with the type of support that will enable them to speak their conscience. Why? Because we understand that many of folk, and there are folks in this room right now, in this conversation right now, who have suffered, who were close to being, if not being, unhoused until Cori Bush and the folks occupied the steps of the U.S. Capitol, forced the hand of the federal legislature, tried through Maxine Waters, although Clyburn and Pelosi and them couldn't get the numbers together to vote, and so threw it back to Biden. But the problem is that you've got close to $47 billion that has already been encumbered by the federal government that is ostensibly available for the states and the cities and the localities to disperse to take care of this business. And we talked about this last week, so I won't go back into it again. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is because many of the cities where folks have not received relief have black mayors, have black city councils. So then the question becomes, what are you doing? And what we're going to see shortly when we start talking about the black press, and particularly the black press that leads up to this discovery of Charles Loeb by the New York Times and other reports in this past few days, what we're going to see is that they predicted that shortly after this beginning of black elected officials in the post-Voting Rights Act era, there would come black politicians whose interests would be less and less influenced by advancing black people and brown people and poor people, and more influenced by two things. Number one, the desire to stay in office, and number two, external forces that aren't part of their communities. This is what happens. So we aren't just reading, we aren't just studying, we aren't just learning and having conversations just for the sake of doing that, although that is a value. That is a value, but it's not the only value. We then take that information and use the momentum of memory to act in a more informed manner. So, let's talk a little bit about, there was a story that you saw that you put out on social media, and it led me to, because it was actually in Tuesday's paper about this brother. And we said we talk about it today. And I'm just, listen, y'all, because this is live. In a minute, we're going to start having conversation with folk, bring folk in. Professor Hunter, in addition to, of course, being a college professor and having a classroom on the airwaves 6 days a week, including this, and in perpetuity with narrative, of course, we know that one of your first sets of talents and skills that you put together, and the foundation for a great deal of what we do now, is being a person who engages in writing what Ted Poston and others, and I'm looking at this autobiography of Ted Poston up there. It's actually entitled this, Writing the First Draft of History, because that's what journalists do. They write the first draft of history. So why did this catch your eye about this particular writer, First Draft of History?
Well, in the framework of what we've been doing, you and I had never heard of this man before. So that was the first thing. I was like, so there were Black press during World War II who were in these places. Like, because we think about Black press as being impoverished and beleaguered, and they don't have the staff and the finances to go. And not only were they in these places, but they were actually reporting the truth back to Black people. Wow. Because, in the era that I came up in the late 80s, early 90s in journalism, all of those papers were beleaguered, impoverished. They weren't, breaking news. They were, it was a lot of social stuff, not a lot of this kind of journalism. So it warmed my heart, but it also made me angry that we don't have this today. Like our Black media, if you think about it, it's a lot of headlines with edges snatchings and a lot of celebrity news. And listen, it costs money to have journalists that actually will be on the ground, which is why, the commitment that we have in the hub, which is another piece of this puzzle, is that, we have the Haitian Times now that's in partnership with us. So we knew, one of the first stories came out in the hub.news on what happened in Haiti because we have the Haitian Times connection. We have Cedric in Brazil because stuff is happening in Brazil, but we need people on the ground to talk about it. We're doing something with Undocu Black. And so, and I'm building, and it's taking a while because again, resources are important and I'm not trying to go out and get funding, because that's a whole other dance, which I'm not willing to do because if we're going to have true ownership, however long it takes is going to take. So when I read that story, I was like, how come I didn't know about it? And it was interesting because it was on a thread, somebody's thread. And the very newspaper that was propagandizing the war on behalf of the government. And then it just hit me like everything that we know. We talked about Santa Claus this morning. This afternoon. Everything that we know is filtered through somebody else's lens about what they want us to know so that we can behave in a way that makes it easy for them to profit and do all of the things they want to do. And we have to be vigilant. So we have to support real news media outlets that are doing that work. And I don't care whether they're Black or not. I just need them to tell the truth. So tell us about Charles Loeb and what you found going down the rabbit hole.
Well, if you don't mind just helping us. And again, let me just say this again, in the context of what we're doing, narrative, because we need resources, has a nominal subscription fee. That's because we need resources. There's no way around this. The story we're about to explore for a few minutes is absolutely about resources. Because without resources, you can't control the institutions you say you own. And as Janet Jackson reminds us, this is a story about control. And so what we're going to see in the Black press is that story. And Charles Loeb that we're about to explore is going to do that. That's number one. When you control it, you can say and do what you want. There was an article in the Guardian newspaper a couple of days ago. And understand, when we start talking about vouchers and charter schools, I agree with Dr. Du Bois. Dr. Du Bois said this many years ago when he was talking about segregation. He said, what the Negro needs is not segregated education. What the Negro needs is not integrated education. What the Negro needs is education. so let's not get caught up.
And let me piggyback on this, and I have been like, I'm not doing, any publicity around it. I'm not being heavy-handed because I feel like, number one, we don't need everybody. Right. So there's not going to be this mass, like I'm not imagining, 50 million people coming into narrative and doing this because what is required is people who are willing to do the work. Right. So this is not a hangout spot. This is not, this is not your clubhouse. This is not, I'm not mentioning clubhouse. I'm saying this is not a clubhouse. This is not a hangout spot. This is not a place to clap back and snatch edges. This is a place of work and servitude and commitment to building something that you may not even enjoy. Right. So this is the work for the next generation and the generation after that. And so, I was committed to funding it, as much as I could, in the beginning. And I'm so eternally grateful for the people who get this because not everyone's going to get it. You know how you may like something, but for me, we'll know whether you really are committed by what you do. Your actions will show.
Right.
So you really want knowledge? I really want freedom. I need us to be free. I'm done. Da 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 da. Okay. Are you in narrative? Okay. Then what you say? Sew your lips up.
Right.
So keep cosplaying.
Yeah. No question. No question. No question.
Thank you for saying that. And the resources, the way we imagine it, this is not just about the history blocks that we're putting, but it's then about controlling documentaries, TV shows, movies, animation, all of the things that you watch, a Disney do, we should be able to do because we are the overriding viewers of all of this content that's out there.
That's right.
Why shouldn't we invest in the things that we want to see? And then, the other thing is I'm like, who do we partner with? Are there people out there doing it? I don't want to reinvent the wheel. The thing rolls, let's roll, let's come together. But that also shows who's committed, right? Because do you really want to do this? Do you want to partner with people who are about this? Or do you want to go grab a check somewhere? Because the checks are there. People are getting them every day. They're all of these folk gathering up our great talent and giving them money to do things. And it's beautiful.
That's right. Well, I mean, it is what it is.
Right.
Because they.
I was being sarcastic.
No, I know, and I'm sorry. You're right. You were being said. It is. Well, you use beautiful the way my father used to use lovely. You knew Haywood Carr didn't like something when he called it lovely. How you doing? Everything. It's lovely. It's lovely. So you say it's beautiful. it's beautiful and predictable. That's what you do.
I mean, and even, and I don't want to derail because what you're about to do is important. But, when you held up that newspaper, the reason why I cringe is because they're even using the census thing as a rallying cry. And I need us to be really mindful, y'all, because there's no such thing as white. This is the fact that we even have to check boxes, right? So they did everything they could to divvy up all of the black people into all these categories. And then you just got white there to keep the numbers. For time immemorial, since they've been in this settler colony, right? Whatever you call this, the Irish weren't white, then they became white. The Italians weren't white, then they became white. The Jewish people weren't white, then they became white. Hispanic, non-white, white Hispanic. Like, what is that? That's another. So they're playing games, and now they can't. There's nothing they can do. Because white's not a thing. It's going to always be diluted. It's going to always diminish because it's made up, and you can't hold it up for so long. Now they've abdicated to say, okay, we'll do what they did in South Africa, Rhodesia, whatever you call it.
That's right.
So, but if we can all agree that wherever you come from, whatever your nationality is, whatever the country of origin, you're not actually white. If you could divorce yourself from that and be human and operate by what we need to have happen and work towards it, I think, that's the move.
This
thing is a trick bag, and we need to be careful because what they're doing is rallying the stupid nationalists out there who are holding to a flag and a culture that's a mythology. So because they don't have anything else and they don't feel like a human being, or they don't feel powerful, this is their only thing that they can hold on to. This is a rallying cry. So
that's right.
I'm not. So anyway,
no, not at all. No, this is what we're talking about. The story we're about to explore for a minute, and the man at the center of it, we realize that whiteness is crumbling, the myth of whiteness, and this isn't about white people as much as it is about a concept that has been at the heart of the modern world system. We talk about settler colonialism. We start talking about settler states, like the United States, like every state on the West Atlantic where Europeans came in. Even the ones where they're not the majority, which still maintain the borders that were drawn by these international white wars. We're talking about a concept that lies at the heart of the modern world system, the economic system, the political system. It's all commingled. There's a phrase that academics bandy about now called racial capitalism. And people don't agree necessarily on what it means, but a simple way of thinking about it is that you can't think about the modern world system without thinking about race in the modern world. And you can't think about race in the modern world without thinking about whiteness, because the concept of whiteness, the artificial notion of race, and at the heart of that, the artificial notion of whiteness has been used to organize the systems in which we live, the social structure, to use that first category in our Africana Studies framework. And of course, as we've said many times, the reason we put that framework first is because the one we live in, the one we experience every day, and in order to unthink it, to get to the question of who we are to each other, the governance structure category, we made that the second question. We got to turn the noise down. So let's do a little noise turning down today. And understand that whiteness will do anything to maintain itself because it is bonded with this hierarchy, this empire-based system. You know, there's a brand new book out by Susan Williams called White Malice, the CIA and the Covert Recolonization of Africa. It's an interesting piece. Here's John F. Kennedy shaking hands with Kwame Nkrumah, who we're going to talk about in a minute with regard to this National Black Press. She's at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. And it follows in the footsteps of a number of books. Here's a more recent one. This guy, Larry Devlin, Chief of Station Congo is the name of his book. He was actually there in the Congo when they were killing Patrice Lumumba. And understand in some stories, it ain't no good guys. Ralph Bunche, who did an incredible amount of good work for Black people and other folk, he was all up in the middle of it too with the UN. Also over there in Palestine, which is a whole nother thing. I mean, so in other words, the United States, like any empire, will continue to try to promote its self-interest. And at the heart of it is a notion of whiteness. In fact, she says that, you know, the post-colonial African independence movements were systematically undermined by one country above all, the United States. You can't have these independent countries over there in Africa. But if you can't control it, then you realize you can't control it. Then you start putting out the illusion that you're making nice. But the reason you're doing it is to maintain control. You know, whether it's giving away an Oscar or a Grammy or Emmy, whether it's running a story about a Black journalist who got it right about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, whether it's bringing a few people in, diversity, equity into corporations, you know, hey, it's great to do it, but you're doing that to maintain yourself as the arbiter, to maintain yourself as the one who is the authority. Because as long as you can get people to say, yeah, we're making progress. Why? Because they let you in. That's, yeah, look, we made progress. Did it help you? Well, I mean, I feel good about it. Wait, yeah, we made progress. Okay, see, no, what you did is you kept the Academy of Motion Picture Arts relevant for another few ticks of the clock. You kept the New York Times relevant for a few more ticks of the clock. Why? They're not, these aren't concessions that are changes of heart. They are concessions because of the external pressure of a world in which whiteness is fracturing and dissolving. And if you're going to keep the ad revenue going in a dying business, or if you're going to keep people who are now making independent media and art and culture looking at you, you're going to have to make some concessions. So to this New York Times article, and look, here's the first clue that's sneaking in. It ain't the front page, it's the science section. It's the science section, and there's the brother right here, right? They got a drawing of him, right? In the article, William Broad, a Black war correspondent, exposed military deceptions about the atomic bomb. Loeb, L-O-E-B, footnote. All right, there's probably maybe one other nerd out there who knows that the Loeb editions are the Harvard Press editions of Greek translations. In fact, that's what Theophilo Benga taught us our first lessons in Attic Greek, was using the Loeb translations. But anyway, no relation, I'm sure. L-O-E-B. Loeb reflects on the atomic bombed area, read the headline in the Atlanta Daily World, Black Press, governance structure, October 5th, 1945, 2 months after Hiroshima's ruin. In the world of Black newspapers, that name alone was enough to attract readers. Right, L-O-E-B. Charles H. Loeb was a Black war correspondent whose articles in World War II were distributed to papers across the United States by the National Negro Publishers Association, NNPA. We'll come back to that in a second, because the NNPA still exists. It's the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Its headquarters is down at the Thurgood Marshall Center on 12th Street here in DC, Northwest DC. And the CEO is our friend, Ben Chavis, who is Ben Chavis Muhammad, who is the head of the National Newspaper Association. That is the group that was formerly known as the National Negro Publishers Association, founded in 1940. We're going to talk about the history because all of this ties together. It's very interesting, and it's a governance structure conversation, who we are to each other, and in its victories and in its missed opportunities. We have the ability to study it and understand and learn and regain the momentum of memory, so we won't make the same mistakes, and we can capture some of the momentum of the good things that this organization did. So we know that this brother, Charles Loeb, who had been writing for a number of years and who wrote for a number of years up into his death, mostly for the Cleveland Call and Post, now the Ohio Call and Post, a very important newspaper, which we'll talk about in a second. He was trained, he was actually thinking he was going to go to medical school. In fact, Charles Loeb, who was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1905, Charles Loeb went to the first school for Black folk in Baton Rouge, McDonough High School. And then he went to Howard University. He graduated in 1926 with a degree in science, and wanted to go, they didn't call it biology back then, it's like zoology. He wanted to go to medical school, but he ran out of money. So he was trained, at least had his first basic foundation as a student in the sciences. And then he dropped out of school, and then he started working eventually as a newspaper man. He worked for the New York Amsterdam News. He worked for the Atlanta Daily World, as we just heard, which was the most successful Black weekly for a number of years. Now, there were other Black weeklies who were more successful depending on when you look at them. The Pittsburgh Courier being one, the great Chicago Defender, Robert Abbott, and then Robert Singstack comes on after him. There's a great book called The Defender, which does the history of that. But he also works for the Jacksonville World. Charles Loeb is writing all this time. He then joins the Cleveland Call and Post in 1933, and he stays there for 45 years. Now, this article, which talks about the fact that he went overseas, sponsored by the National Negro Publishers Association, to cover World War II, particularly Black troops, goes on, and here it takes up this whole page talking about the fact that while the New York Times and all the white press was buying the propaganda that the U.S. military was sending out, that these bombings didn't kill people with radiation and that they died peacefully. And while they're doing all that, this man's a scientist. So, in fact, they go on to say, in fact, this is one thing the government is sending out. The government says during press tours, they're in New Mexico and Japan, of the atomic detonation points, because the guy grows over the Manhattan Project. They blowing up stuff in New Mexico, right? And then they're in Japan. And then they bring the press in to buy the propaganda. And they say, see the Geiger counter? There are low readings. There's little or no radiation danger. You could live there forever. Mr. Lawrence, who was the writer for the New York Times at the time, quoted the general as saying of Hiroshima, meaning what? It ain't no lingering radiation. Look at the Geiger counter. It's not ticking, see? And these fools just writing it down, just writing it down. My man Loeb, our man Loeb, your man, the man in your craft, Loeb, Colonel Warren was the Manhattan Project's top physician. His stateside job was to protect bomb makers from radiation hazards. He goes on, and there's a book called Atomic Doctors that was published last year that talks about the fact that he knew better and that they made choices to withhold all the science. But here's the thing. Loeb knew that the Geiger counter only captured one form of radiation. And see, he says, this is what the writer says. At Howard University, one of the nation's leading historically Black colleges and universities, Loeb had taken pre-med curriculum before turning to newspaper work and was familiar with the basics of physics and chemistry, anatomy and pathology, x-rays and lead shielding. And then he goes on to say, it's unclear where Mr. Loeb encountered Colonel Warren, but he encountered him. And then in the New York Daily World, he wrote that, that radiation comes in two forms. And I'm telling you, these people are dying. and they're gonna die. And so the black readers are understanding. It says, Colonel Warren, the radiologist, Mr. Loeb said, judged that a single exposure to a dose of gamma radiation, similar in effect to X-rays, at the time of the detonation, gave rise to the gruesome ills. In other words, the thing explodes. There's a burst, gamma rays, X-rays. That's what's going to kill you. The Geiger counter doesn't pick that up. But Loeb knew to listen to the scientists and then ask questions to extract that, and then he gives it to the black readers. I'm going to pause there because
I need you to pause there because I need everybody to pause there.
Yes.
What you're telling us is that journalists, and in particular Charles Loeb, knew some things.
How about that?
You're not just going into a situation, which is why the scholarship that you require of us is so important, that whatever field you're in, that you come into it with a vast knowledge of the thing in which you're covering.
Yes.
And this is sorely missed today, but I wanted to sit in that too.
You know what? Let's stay there. Let's stay in that chair you just made us sit in. Because what we're about to explore just for a few minutes is exactly what you said. Here's the standard. If you want to be a journalist, you writing a blog or a tweet is not being a journalist. Having a staff was a luxury for these women and men. And there were women, Carlotta Bass, the publisher of the California Eagle, being one of them. Let's be very clear. But you ain't got no huge staff, which means these aren't just writers. These are researchers. In Loeb's case, they are trained even at a nominal level in science. And but what brought them together was what is something similar to what we build in the narrative. In other words, we cannot rely on these other people, nor should we. The idea that we would rely on them is unsound. Let's just look, for example, at this. By November 1945, a month after Loeb's article, public awareness of the radiation issue had grown to the point that General Groves could no longer deny the toll of the bomb's initial bursts. Instead, he described their impact on humans as a, quote, very pleasant way to die. What? They're dying. Okay, well, it's pleasant. Says what? The black press in subsequent months kept pounding away. The Baltimore Afro-American spoke of, quote, thousands of radiation victims. Goes on. Now, here's where the Time puts the editorial in. Mr. Loeb died in 1978 at age 73. While getting no credit for his atomic scoop, he became known late in life among journalists as the dean of black newsmen. And he goes on, hold on. While getting no credit, I'm sorry. While we were clueless, because what you see in it, let me just spend 3 minutes on the career of Charles Loeb. 1944-45, that NNPA sends him to the war theater, but it ain't just him. They send Ralph Matthews. He's in the Pacific area. They raised the resources to send 12 others. They got 14 reporters overseas because they have pooled their resources. Because if you're reading the Defender, if you're reading the Courier, if you're reading the Column Post, if you're reading on the East Coast, the Afro, but it ain't just the Baltimore Afro or the DC Afro. They got a New York Afro. They got Afro. If you're reading the Norfolk Journal and Guide, if you're reading the Atlanta Daily World, if you're reading all the Jackson Advocate, if you're reading the black newspapers, you know what's going on. And they sent overseas correspondence. Interesting. In 1949, Charles Loeb goes out to Lincoln University in Jeff City, Missouri, to join fellow black journalists and newspaper publishers, and they are there to ask a simple question at this HBCU, post-World War II. The topic of their meeting, will the Negro newspaper die? Sponsored by the Lincoln University School of Journalism. So everybody talking about we're going to revive, we're going to have journalism at HBCUs, we're going to connect HBCUs. Did you know that HBCUs used to have journalism that was connected? No, I didn't know that. Get the momentum of memory. And before you invent the wheel, go back and look at them hella wheels in the 40s. Because this ain't in the New York Times. What the New York Times is basically saying is, look at us. So we're going to give ourselves credit for discovering this Negro who was writing in obscurity. No, there were millions of black people reading these black newspapers. Their children were reading the black newspapers in them Jim Crow schools that were so terrible that we had to have Brown versus Board of Education. Yeah, what they wanted was resources, but what you do not mistake that for the fact that they weren't reading. They were reading the black press, and the black press had hella black reporters. Understand it? Come forward a few more years. They're 1953. He's in Cleveland, right? Let me talk about this guy for a minute because I'm going to tie a couple of these political things together. The publisher of the Calling Post, the Cleveland Calling Post, dude named William Otis Walker. William Otis Walker said, look at black people. Look at black people. By the early 60s, black people made up 37% of the population of Cleveland. And here's what Otis Walker said. Talk about whiteness. He says, those aren't white people. They're Irish. They're Czechs. They're Slavs. He said they all cling to their ethnic identity. We need to practice ethnic politics. We're black. Our ethnicity has been determined through coming out of enslavement. Most people who live up here, who migrated from places like Baton Rouge, like Birmingham, wherever. So we black. But those people you're calling white, watch them. The Czechs vote for the Czechs. The Irish vote for the Irish. They're in their own communities. If we approach this as ethnic instead of racial politics, we can win all the elections. We're the largest ethnic group in Cleveland. So they launch and then he says this. He said, we got to figure out a way to do that. And we have to bust up the Republican Democratic Party and make these open primaries. Because if you run an open primary and the top two finishers then compete, we can take over the city. We got to think ethnic politics. So what do? Because these guys were at that time coming out of the Republican Party. They said, we need to be independent. We need to be registered independents. The first time Carl Stokes, who ended up being the mayor of Cleveland, ran, he ran as an independent. Because the black press guys, Walker and them boys, including Loeb, is like, look, in fact, Loeb paves the way for them because in 1956, I don't know, I guess the Times didn't have room, and I understand why. 1956, he runs for Congress against the Czech on an ethnic approach. Doesn't win, but he's softening up the idea. So their basic thing is we can fracture whiteness because it ain't real. Ask them Irish where they get along with the Czechs. Ask the Czechs and the Irish how they feel about the Poles. They cling to these ethnic identities. Stop approaching whiteness as a monolith. The white community is not a monolith. Wait, we hear that about the black community. Yeah, but you know who's closer to a monolith than the white community? The black community. Because the oppression made blackness. Whiteness is the way that oppression maintains itself by extending to this artificial concept of whiteness some form of privilege. Once you take the privilege away, whiteness disappears. And so it's very interesting. So anyway, I'll speed through this. He's getting all kind of awards from the black press. In 1971, he gets a number of awards. By the end of his life, 1977, he's going around. He's not just getting awards locally in Cleveland. The elementary school has a day for him. They give an award. The children come in. He's an interesting guy because he writes poetry. He has a column. You know, we talk about Calvin Trillin, the poet who used to write for The Nation, this kind of thing. Man, this dude, Charles Loeb, was writing political commentary and poetry for many years in the Cleveland Calling Post. His column was called Education in Rhyme. No, Editorial in Rhyme. The Mediations of Methuselah Brown, America's #1 exponent of horse sense. Now, I understand, while getting no credit for his time in school, he became known late in life among journalists as the dean of black newsmen. Not late in life, bruh. Not late in life, all along. But let me wind this up because I haven't even gotten to the thing that's messed up about this. Remember I said the publisher, the owner and publisher of the Cleveland Calling Post was William Otis Walker. And if y'all want to read about this, there are 2 good books that I would recommend. One, I'll do the second one first because it gives you a blow by blow of what I'm about to talk about. Lawrence Hogan, many years ago, wrote a book called A Black National News Service, The Associated Negro Press and Claude Barnett. Very important book. He narrates what I'm about to tell y'all. The book that expands it on this national, the Associated Negro Press, is my man Gerald Horne. The Rise and Fall of the Associated Negro Press, Claude Barnett's Pan-African News and the Jim Crow Paradox, Gerald Horn. Pause. Social structure question, African states. Who are Africans to other people? Well, to the New York Times and social structure media, Black people are Americans who happen to be Black, and Black history is American history, blah, 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 blah. The governance structure, who are Africans to each other? The Black American press has never been only for Black Americans, because their overseas correspondence didn't just cover World War II. Claude Barnett's outfit had reports coming in from the Caribbean, from Africa. And when they would put things on their wire, in other words, I hate to use this example, but I'll use it because people got a governance social structure framework. Think of the Black Associated Press, but this ain't what Loeb was in. Here's where the tragedy comes in. Because remember, Loeb and them boys is with the AANP. In other words, they with the Black newspaper publishers. Claude Barnett, born in the late 1880s, went to Tuskegee University. Claude Barnett starts the Associated Negro Press as an independent organization to provide news for all the Black newspapers. It is one of the most fascinating stories that you ever want to hear. 1889 in Florida, that's where he was born. He went to Tuskegee, graduated in 1906. He then kind of moved around. He worked as a mailman because from 9 months old, his family moved to Chicago. So he really raised in Chicago. He really Chicagoan. When back to Chicago, worked as a mailman. He started noticing in the newspapers these great pictures of great Black figures and history and this kind of thing. So he started a mail order company where he started selling the photographs and selling the artwork and this kind of thing. And he began his Associated Negro Press as a business venture. He said, in exchange for you putting advertisements in the Black newspapers, I will subsidize that with revenue from me selling. And he said, you know what? I want to get past selling photographs about great Black people and little stories. So he starts in 1919, the Associated Negro Press. And at its height, the ANP, which had news reporters all over. This is why this book right here does a great job of it. The Associated Negro Press, they had reporters. If it was an earthquake in Haiti, you ain't gonna read about it in the New York Times. You read about it in Jackson Advocate. If you see like the brother Robinson, who went over after World War I to help set up the Ethiopian Air Force to fight Italy, the pressure was put on the U.S. government to send him by the Black press. And who's covering it? These stringers from the ANP. The ANP was fire. When I tell you want to read about the Italo-Ethiopian War, you got to pick up the Pittsburgh Courier in 1935. Haile Selassie gives a speech at the League of Nations, the Chicago Defender, but not just the Defender, not just the Courier, not just the Amsterdam News. You south of Jim, you south of the Mason-Dixon line, the Afro, the Norfolk Journal and Guide. You coming down to Savannah, Georgia. You down in Atlanta with the Daily World. You in Jacksonville, Florida with the World. You come across to Alabama, Mississippi, the Jackson Advocate. You go all the way out to Louisiana. Then you get to the West Coast, California. 200 papers, and not just that. Oh my goodness. We could talk all day about Claude Barnett, but I'm gonna drop this thing right quick and keep going because Claude Barnett got married. Claude Barnett died in 1967. Oh, wait, I should tie the loose thing on the Cleveland Calling Post guy. By 1940, the Associated Negro Press is providing this stuff to the Black newspapers, but it's controlled by Claude Barnett and his people. You got a bureau chief here in DC, this kind of thing. His second in command, we're gonna come to that in a second, because in 1940, the Negro Newspaper Association Negro Newspaper Association, the one that Loeb worked with because he's with the Calling Post, these are the owners of the newspapers. And guess what? In 1940, they pulled their own organization together. Now, mind you, the history of Black news organizations in terms of associations goes back to T. Thomas Fortune and them, Ida B. Wells and them generation, around 1875, this is during Reconstruction, they come up with the first association of black newspapers. This is insane. Wait, you can still see the cotton in the field. Half y'all was under the whip. Yeah. So let's bring all the newspapers together. Newspapers, y'all got newspapers? Come on, y'all. That's why we build narrative. We don't reinvent the wheel. They come together then. And Fortune, the New York Age, Du Bois writing for the New York Age as a teenager in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. I'm saying this is the kind of momentum you begin to see now. But in 1940, you've got two generations of black newspaper people. And these cats in 1940, they think that them old guys, now most of them ancestors, then the next generation, y'all kind of slow with it. There ain't no new things in history. So they start the Negro Newspaper Publishers Association in 1940. And guess what? They do. If y'all want to read about this, there's a number of good books. I mean, the oldest book on the black press that I'm aware of, at least off the top of my head, I. Garland penned, initial I, period, Garland, Garland, Penn. He's friends with Ida B. Wells. In fact, I. Garland Penn, Freddie Douglass, and Ida B. Wells are the ones who wrote that, Why the Negro is Not in the Colored Exposition. When we talked about Aunt Jemima and she was at the Colored Exposition in Chicago, the World's Exposition, the Columbian Exposition, and the Haitians let them put the pamphlets out. I. Garland Penn was one of those guys. He wrote a history of the black press back then. So you can go to 1890s, 1900, 1910, you'll see I. Garland Penn. So you can read some of that early history. And of course, it goes back to Freeman's Journal and all this kind of stuff as well. But the point is, in 1940, the next generation is saying we want our own thing. So they do that, but they ask Claude Barnett to come to the meeting because Barnett got the independent news source, The Wire, that's feeding these guys, but they don't want to pay and they want to control. So they build their own wire. And that's the one that sends those 14, including Loeb, overseas. And near the end of some of their lives, in interviews they gave to Lawrence Hogan, they said, I wish we hadn't done that. We could have paid Claude Barnett, but we were so damn fixed on owning it. Barnett already had the infrastructure. Barnett never promoted himself. Barnett was all about Pan-African. He wanted the whole thing. If we had just subsidized him, because at the time they said, why don't y'all just pay Barnett? In fact, they had worked out the memo. Look, let's put a little Barack Obama reference in here right quick. Barnett missed the first meeting when they came together to put together the Negro Newspaper Association because they wanted him to come because he was already giving them stuff, even though many of them didn't pay their bills. One of the reasons the Associated Negro Press went out of business because they ran out of money because they hadn't paid their bills to him to keep the thing going. But he couldn't come, so he sent his top lieutenant, a dude named Frank Marshall Davis. Y'all ever heard that name? You ever heard the name, Professor Hunter?
Never. I'm so mad right now. I'm sitting here taking notes.
Oh, don't worry. I ain't even dropped the bomb yet. Wait a minute. I'm going to tell you about the bomb in a minute. Yeah, I ain't even dropped the bomb yet. The bomb is saved for narrative. If y'all want to hear about the bomb, you had to code the narrative right here. What is the bomb? Just wait. Just wait about 5 minutes. Here's our friend. This is David Garrow's big book, Rising Star. I got Barack Obama's books, all of them, including Dreams of My Father and all the way, and then the first battle. But the thing I like about this guy, David Garrow, nothing personal. It's like he's obsessed. He just basically gave a TikTok like every day of Barack Obama's life or something. So early in this book, and this book is 1,000, including index, 1,460 pages. On page 72, 73, he starts talking about when Barack Obama was 8 years old and went to Hawaii with his grandparents to live down there. And one of their closest friends was this dude named Frank Marshall Davis, who had married this white woman years before, and they moved to Hawaii. She had a little money. Then they got divorced and so forth and so on. Frank Marshall Davis and Barack Obama start a little relationship. The reason some people may have heard that name, what's that fool's name that went to Dartmouth, Indian American guy, Dinesh D'Souza. He made a whole movie where he with this harebrained social structure theory that Frank Marshall Davis is Barack Obama's real father. For For a long time, Frank Marshall Davis was a registered member of the Communist Party. Frank Marshall Davis was during the 1930s and 40s. And if you want to read about Frank Marshall Davis or read some of his stuff, here is a book of his stuff edited by John Edgar Tidwell called Living the Blues. Living the Blues. Memoirs of a Black journalist and poet. Very important. Scottsboro Boys, all this stuff he's writing about. Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis was Team Claude Barnett. So that was the Barack Obama. Y'all can go look him up if you want, because I mean the CRT, Sharia law, communist crowd. In other words, the white nationalists who will use any label to drive their white national agenda. For a while, they were waving Frank Marshall Davis that, see, he's a Muslim and he's a communist, because you really know this guy, Frank Davis, that was his daddy. They were in Hawaii and he's the one had him reading Karl Marx and all, these people who, if Karl Marx came up and asked him for $1 or to call him an Uber, they wouldn't know who he was. But they waved that Frank Marshall Davis flag for a minute. But anyway, that brings Obama in and takes him out at the same time. Barnett couldn't make the meeting in 1940 when they put together the National Negro Publishers Association. So he sent his right-hand man, Frank Marshall Davis. Frank Marshall Davis comes to the meeting prepared to negotiate, and they can't get it together. The missed opportunity was to infuse the Associated Negro Press with the resources it needed to keep feeding the Black newspapers. But Barnett kept on Donna into the 1950s, into the 1960s, set up connections with the newspapers in the Caribbean, got the highest award for a non-resident, non-native in Haiti. They gave him Claude Barnett that award, went to Ghana, toured 11 or 12 countries with his wife, and here's where the bomb comes. His wife, Etta Moulton Barnett. She was born in 1901 in Texas, Weimar, Texas, got a degree from the University of Kansas, 1931. She went on to Broadway. She starred in a number of Black productions, starred on Broadway. Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte saw her. And Poitier was like, oh man, she is beautiful. And Belafonte said, hey man, stay out of my way. I'm getting ready to make that move. And they were crushed when they found out she was married to Claude Barnett. One of the most beautiful, one of the most gifted and talented. She dubbed songs in Barbara Stanwyck movies in Hollywood. Took Stanwyck's voice out, put her voice in. When you see her singing them songs, that lady was in the Big Valley or whatever, she went in Hollywood stars as younger. That's Etta Moulton singing. Etta Moulton was the first Black woman to perform at the White House. But she and Claude Barnett, oh yeah, Jay-Z and Beyonce, yeah, we got Will and Jada. Now go look up Claude and Etta Moulton Barnett. Remember Dr. King and Coretta Scott King, Martin King and Coretta Scott King went to Kwame Nkrumah's bringing in as the prime minister in 1957 in Ghana. Claude and Etta Barnett were there. In fact, Etta Barnett interviewed Martin Luther King. They switched over, took the flag down, took the British flag down, put the Ghanaian flag up at midnight, 1957. And that's when the switch over. After it was over, they cheered, they talked, there's a few speeches, it's over. They sitting down. Etta Moulton is like, King, let me talk to you. The first interview after midnight, the day of independence in Ghana, was Etta Moulton Barnett interviewing Martin Luther King. How you feel about it, bro? For the Black press. This is Etta. It's not Claude. You understand? Etta Barnett lived to 102. She passed away in 2004. No, yeah, 2003. 2003. She passed away. She has all kind of writings, interviews. Y'all go look up Etta Moulton Barnett, or better yet, wait till we drop her in the You Should Know section of narrative, and we'll get into a long conversation about who she was, because she was a whole beast, completely separate from her 20 years older than she was husband. So but we got all that. We began all that. You did this, Professor Hunter. We began all that because the New York Times decided that they were going to give themselves credit for discovering an unknown black writer who got it right about how y'all killed those people in Japan twice with those bombs, except that ain't even the story. That ain't even the story. Anyway.
And as you're holding up that paper, I wonder if the 1619 Project, I'm gonna let that just sit in y'all's spirit for a second. You talk about the relevancy.
Well, let me say this.
Had that been in another paper? Could that have been in a black paper? Could the 1619 Project, would it have been relevant? I'm asking a question, but I'm not expecting an answer because it's beautiful. Yeah. It's all beautiful.
No. The 1619 Project was already written in the black press.
No, I'm.
You saying
correct, right? But the Pulitzer and all of the fanfare around that, because it's the New York Times. You just talked about them in the science section, congratulating themselves for discovering somebody that we should have already known. I'm mad that we didn't know. As a journalist for damn near 20 years, that I didn't know any of these people until today. Because I'm always surprised. We have a little chit chat, but you don't tell me where you're going. I'm always surprised.
No, we have a good time with it.
Yes. And it's sad because everybody who's studying journalism, should know these people.
Oh, I should mention this, Professor Hunter.
Please.
When the journalists would meet, Lincoln University used to do it every year. In fact, some of y'all out there from Missouri, go to Jefferson City, or if you went to Lincoln University, there's a book to be written. There's an article to be written. There's stories to collect about those journalism conferences among black newspaper editors, newspaper publishers, and newspaper writers at Lincoln University. Because one of the things they would do when they gathered, they would give scholarships to black students going to the black schools. And so there is a history of black journalism connected to black colleges and black K-12. It was the elementary school students who honored Charles Loeb back in the 60s. At a black school in Cleveland. They had a Charles Loeb Day. So Etta Moulton tells the stories about when she first went out singing and performing, and she said, I was on the HBCU tour. All I'm saying is that what you're raising, Professor Hunter, is so important, because this is the thread that people who are in this room right now, who are on narrative, you have the keys to these answers. You got elders in your house right now. Some of y'all are the elders listening to it who are thinking, I used to read that paper. There are over 200 papers called Barnett in them. And they aren't papers just reporting what's going on in the US. They are papers that are reporting what's going on in the black world. They have overflowed the boundaries of the United States. And some of y'all read those papers. Some of y'all read. And so the only thing I say is this. It used to be an honor. I remember Manning Marable, who made training. I remember when Manny Marable was at Ohio State. I sit and talk with Manny Marable before he left Ohio State and went, I guess, Colorado first, then Columbia. But when he was a young man in graduate school, he was Fisk, and then he started writing for the black newspapers. He wrote a column called Along the Color Line, and he said, "I will write this, and I'm going to give it to you in exchange for a subscription." And that's how, as a graduate student, Manning Marable, following in the footsteps of W.E.B. Du Bois, he said, it was an honor to have a column in the black newspapers. Some of y'all have written for black newspapers. Some of y'all are on the staff of these black newspapers. And you're right, they're struggling because the whole model has been disturbed, has been disrupted, and has been for years. But that doesn't mean that we can't rebuild it with the current technology. Narrative. These people can look at their websites and looking at Griot and looking at the community, and people realizing that the world is no longer as white as it used to be, trying to bring a few black people in. But if you're watching white-facing media, that's great to have some black people on there. But we talking about something else. Pick up these books here and read about, because one of the things Claude Barnett, and so one of the reasons they didn't fall out, but one of the reasons they wouldn't go all in with Barnett, this news is black as hell. You understand? I mean, black people have their own ideas. Imagine black people with their own ideas on U.S. foreign policy, and it's in the black press. This is not Afrofuturism. You want to find what we think about the war? Don't go look at the Negroes that they interview or the two columnists who are now in the white newspapers. Go back and dig up the black press from the 19-teens all the way up through the 60s and see what they said, because it's in there. It's in there. It's already there. And where's the Vivian Harsh Library in Chicago, where the association with Claude Barnett's papers are, and Etta Moulton Barnett put them there, whether it's any of the archives, whether it's Howard University, where the Black Newspaper Association put their archives, and Howard began Clint Wilson II, who wrote about the Black press. Clint Wilson II, who put together a proposal to the Knight Foundation decades ago to have Howard be subsidized as a place to re-energize this. But the Knight Foundation decided to pass. Now Nicole is there, Hannah Jones. So to get that going at Howard and connect HBCUs, the first step is to take some of those resources. And I think, becoming aware that she's not already aware, do this. Go back and find out what they did at Lincoln. Go back and find out what they did at these HBCUs and just update it. Because then they gave you the money now. They can't take it back. You know what I'm saying? Then they gave you the money. If they take it back now we know. Are y'all playing? And don't digitize that stuff and give it to the white schools, because that's the game they playing now.
Yes.
We're going to help you digitize. Okay. And then we'll have, what will you have? Control. That's it. Yeah. We see you. Nah. So those of you who are down with this, y'all come on over to Narrative. Thank you all for everybody who's coming. Y'all coming. And it's beautiful, because this is the work. This is our work.
And while we're in this public space, hit the thumbs up, because that's how you say that you're present in class.
That's
you're
right.
Here. Everybody, thumbs up, thumbs up. That's the algorithms. Let's break every space that we're in and let them know we're here.
Yes.
That matters.
Yes.
So Narrative, which we are spending a lot of time in, I'm loving it. I got a DM this week from a woman, part of our Narrative family, and she I'm going to read some of it. She said, "I just want to thank you and Dr. Carr for In Class. I hooked my father, Tommy Hall, to it, and it became our Saturday tradition. Currently, he's in the hospital, and it looks like his body will not contain his spirit any longer. He hasn't been able to watch since his hospitalization, and as the internet will not allow the live streaming, he's asked about the largest Africana class before being placed on a ventilator. I know this is long, but I just want to say thank you for enriching our lives." And she goes on. And so I asked, she's part of Narrative. So I was like, will you come and honor your father? Because you were the first person to introduce me to this notion of ancestors, which, I knew about ancestors, but to understand the transition and that they're always with us. And I mean, the many different conversations we've had about it, I think it's important that we say names and that we honor people. Let me welcome Hortense today.
Hortense.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm good. Sorry, I'm trying to make this so I can see. Okay. I'm good. I wanted to thank you all, because my father and I made it a tradition on Saturdays to watch. And when I hooked him onto you, he could not really work the television and the technology. But I remember one day I was cooking and I was a little late. And next thing I know, he has it on. So he found a way to do this.
I love it. Where are y'all?
Pooler, Georgia. So I'm just gonna say, sadly to say, that afternoon I got the response. My father became an ancestor.
Ashe.
And but I did read the response to him I think I read it about 4 times. It was 3 or 4 times, and I saw his mouth kind of twitch a lot during that time frame, and I knew that this was making him very, very happy.
What's his full name?
Tommy Lee, Lee Hall, born in Tuskegee, Alabama. Yeah, he's actually from Shorter.
What's his birthday?
August 20. Actually, it will be this coming month. Next Monday, August 23rd.
Wait a minute. You didn't say Shorter. Not Shorter, West Virginia.
No, Shorter, Alabama.
Shorter, Alabama. Shorter
right
College. Yes, Shorter College. Yes.
Yeah.
Ashe. Tommy Lee. Oh, what did he study?
You said what did he study?
Mm-hmm.
He did not. He didn't go to college. He went to the city the town right outside of Tuskegee.
Yes.
It's Shorter.
Yes.
And so he did not. Actually, he got a 6th grade education, went back, got his GED. Extremely intelligent man. He always read. He could tell. I would go to him to ask him any questions that I had. Extremely intelligent.
My son, my granddaddy, and my mom. They know.
Yeah.
I bet
And
my mother's from Opelika, Alabama. She went to the 7th grade there and went in Rosenwald schools. Their handwriting was like you had a typewriter. I don't know if your daddy was like
I'm not sure.
like how they wrote, where they write notes. But what I'm saying is those segregated schools, they really gave them an incredible education. Those numbers don't mean anything. 6th grade, no, that school they went to. So how did y'all stay in Alabama, Georgia for a while? You in Georgia?
Actually, my parents had moved to Cleveland, Ohio. They met in Cleveland, Ohio.
No way.
Yeah, my
You've been
father.
talking about Cleveland this whole time.
Yeah, my father had a bus ticket and was about to travel around, and he saw my mother and cashed in his bus ticket.
I love it. What's her name? What's your mom's name?
Brenda Sue Coleman. Well, her maiden name was Coleman.
Yes.
But Hall, she actually passed away 2 years ago.
Ashe. So they together now.
So, yeah.
And listening to every word. And listening to every word.
Yeah.
Going straight now. We ain't got a word. What?
And the beauty of this is, Artens, you have a large family here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your parents may not be on this side, but we're all here. And the thing that I love most about this community that we built is that, we are each other's family. So you're never alone. And I just wanted to, thank you for sharing that, and then have you publicly honor your dad, Tommy Lee, so that we can remember him always.
Yeah, and I just have his picture.
That's him?
You can see it, yeah.
Oh, he's a serviceman.
Yeah. He was drafted Army.
Lord have mercy. Is that Korea or?
He actually got stationed in Korea during drafted Vietnam, but he actually served in Korea.
Ashe. That is a handsome man right there. So you from Cleveland?
Originally from Cleveland. I currently live in Pooler, Georgia. My father passed away in Savannah, Georgia.
Ashe.
Yeah.
So when we say call and post, then you know exactly what we talking about. The newspaper, the black newspaper. I wonder now, you got me wondering if their wedding announcement was in there or anything else was in the call and post if they were in Cleveland all those years.
Yeah, I'm not sure. My father didn't do a lot of talking about his family. You had to kind of pull it out of him, kind of old school mail.
I love it. But the rock though, a rock.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, I wanted to say one thing, and then I don't want to keep it long.
No.
But my father used to be a police officer in Montgomery, Alabama.
Really?
Yeah. And he was one of the first cops on the scene for the Todd Road incident.
What?
Yeah. And so he used to tell me a lot of stories when we used to talk about the cops. He used to tell me a lot of stories about how he had to tell people to go ahead and move because the white cops would try to instigate and try to get them to react. And he would tell me so many stories. And it was during the 80s, during the time of the mayor, Emery Falmer. I think it was Emery Falmer was the mayor at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the stories that I would hear people say about the police, I totally believe it because I heard the stories firsthand from my father of what happened. One person said, I can't wait to catch me an N word. And my father said he told her, be careful, you just might.
Artez, the courage it takes for a black police officer to be black in that uniform. I hope you write those stories down and share them.
And I was going to say we're making space and narrative as one of the initiatives to share your narrative because this is how we remember our people, right? And so we're going to leave space for that in Nubia for folk to share pictures and images, and we're looking into animating some of those stories, and because that's important. That's how we build our tapestry, our history, right, for the long term. So thank you. And that Todd Road incident, now I got a rabbit hole to go down. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Oh my God. Thank you, Artens. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. That is just that life. Oh, I should have mentioned by this is just a footnote to Charles Loeb's life. The Cleveland Post sent Charles Loeb to Montgomery, Alabama, 1955, to cover the trial of Rosa Parks. Anyway, we can keep going. I guess the Times, like that wouldn't fit on the science section. But anyway, so I would just say, wow, he was a police officer in Montgomery, Professor Hunt. I'm just like, come on.
I'm looking at the Hoff riots of 1960. I'm like, what? All of these things, so I want to thank, everybody's bringing their brick to this.
And narrative, well, you know what? When we've been talking about the black press, narrative is the space. See, the thing about the black press was it covered local news. The reason Barnett and them had the national thing was, and the international thing was, to provide these newspapers with the broader stuff. But the black press covered the local news. Now, we don't have that. Well, I'm sorry, narrative. Now, with all of that stuff, as Ted Poston said, it's the first draft of history, y'all. What we just heard Hortense do, we've all got as she was talking. I'm thinking to myself, my mom was in Columbus. I mean, wait, he was in Montgomery. Now I'm thinking I gotta go call Fire Rose Touré and Hank Sanders, who are in Selma, and say, well, man, I gotta call people in Montgomery. I know they know him, and she said he was the first. So narrative. Bring your story. And then, as you say, can you imagine the cartoon of him having that conversation with that cop? Be careful. You might catch one. Now our children can. Oh, I know you can. That's why you said it. Let me stop. This is, oh, man.
And we open the floor to people who are members of narrative. We're going to give preference and precedence to the folk who are, putting their five on it. I appreciate it. Let's bring in somebody. I think you know this gentleman.
Hey, brother.
Do you know him?
Oh man, it's my man, Gary, one of the most lawyers in the South.
Hey, brother.
Texas. What's going on? What you up to?
Can you hear me all right, man? Can you hear me all right?
Yes. You got your book, man. Hold your book up. I gotta find my copies over here somewhere. This is the brother when we talked about months ago American terrorism. Y'all don't know what's going on now. Y'all gotta get that book right there. How are you, man?
I'm good, brother. It's such a pleasure.
Wait. He got his edge up. I'm sure he got his edge up. He got his edge up just for this. I'm seeing.
Yeah.
He's a Southerner. He's a Southerner, right? Yeah. I've been locked in the house like a wild man these last couple of weeks. I did go out, but I'll talk about that in a second. Man, what's going on, brother?
A couple of things, man, real quick. But my mobile barber came and hooked me up, man, for y'all. So
see, that's a whole nother thing. You ain't had to go. He could come to you. Damn,
but man, I'm so proud of what you're doing, brother. I love you so much, man. Yes, sir. This is amazing, man. We talked about it so long ago, and to see it come to fruition is awesome. Yes. But I'm gonna try to get through this as efficiently as possible, man, because I do have a question for you. So I was trying to work on my second project, man, coming up, and I was supposed to be back in New Orleans, back home. COVID kicked off. It's raging. Had some, some issues at home with some folks getting sick. So I had to kind of push it back a little bit. But my mom, right? My mom is an avid researcher. So through the COVID lockdown, she hooked up with a couple of her cousins, and they got hooked on Ancestry, right? And they have been building out our family trees. Yeah, and I remember Professor Hunter last week mentioned that genealogy is going to come up in narrative here. So I figured I'd ask this question of you. So my mother and her cousins had come across one of the most prominent citizens in New Orleans as being possibly a distant relative, right? And so this brother's name is Rivers Frederick, right? Born in 1874 in Point Coupee Parish, a little west of Baton Rouge. At the tender age of 26, after growing up on a plantation, Juilliard plantation, decided to come to New Orleans and pursue his dream of being a physician. So in 1890, he came to Straight College, which is a forebear of Dillard University.
No question.
They merged with the University of New Orleans to go to medical school. He got out of Straight in 1894, enrolled in New Orleans Medical School that year. And 2 years later, though, he had to leave New Orleans. He had to break camp. So he broke camp from the plantation at 26, broke camp again because none of the hospitals in town would take any black folks in to let them study and train and learn. Yeah. 1896, he goes to the University of Chicago Medical School. Didn't have enough money, had to start tutoring students. His family got the money together to keep him in medical school. 1897, he graduated as the first African American to get out of that school. 1898, he gets an internship. One of 12 students out of that whole medical graduating class. He gets an internship at a clinic at the University of Chicago Medical Hospital. Heads back to Point Coupee in 1899, right? So they sent them away to go to school, sent the money up there, go get a bag of knowledge, come back home.
Yeah.
He gets back to Point Coupee, 1899, has a really integrated practice that he sets up. Jed Ma and Paul Clampett, even accept him as a black doctor coming to help them out, coming to fix them up. It was all good a week ago. You know what happens then? He goes to marry a white woman. Oh, hell no. No.
No, you can't do that.
Not no 1899 Point Coupee Parish.
And Point Coupee, man, I mean, that's where the rebellion went out. It would seem to me that there would be some very strict Jim Crow lines there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1900, by 1900, he has to go to, I wanted to get it right. He has to go to, let me look up here real quick. I'll give it to you real quick because I had it set up. Give me a sec. He has to go to a Spanish Honduras at a small government hospital in El Royatán, Spanish Honduras. He catches malaria, has to come back this time he comes back to New Orleans, sets up shop, starts to get his flowers. At that point, he becomes a chief of surgery at Flint Goodrich Hospital, chief of surgery at Goodrich Hospital. And he's teaching now at the places that he had to go to Chicago to go study. Now he's teaching at those places. He's getting his flowers. He's starting to become a real prominent citizen up until 1954 when he passed away. He spent like 40 years. He's one of the distinguished Dillard alumni guys. He passes away in 54, right? In New Orleans. He dies in Goodrich Hospital. He spent chief of surgery 40 years there, right? But none of this is the crazy part. Right before he passed away in 54, though, one of his highlights was he was invited to host Haile Selassie. When Haile Selassie made a state visit, he got the host. But this is the crazy part. Later on in his life, or posthumously after he died, they had taken snatched the name of Jefferson Davis off of a school, slapped his name on that high school, or junior high school in the Seven Water, New Orleans, neighborhood high school. My parents went there. Both of my parents were from the Seven Water.
They went when it was together.
They went there when it was Reverend Frederick, right? High school sweethearts, junior high school sweethearts. And they're going through all of that. Fast forward to now, right? And I'll come back to that in a second. A couple of months ago, it was figured out that he wasn't necessarily a distant relative. When he was born, his parents had 12 siblings.
I was going to ask
Yeah, so come to find out that my great-great-grandmother was one of those 12 siblings.
So he'd be a great-great
uncle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part. My mother, her siblings, all her cousins, my pa, his cousins, they people, they friends, all spent time at a junior high school named after my mom, great-great uncle, and they none of them know about it. They had no clue. They didn't know about him. They didn't know that was her people.
How did that happen? I'm assuming now this is what they're tracking down, because clearly the 12 didn't stay together.
Right, and some were
adopted, the birth order, do you know?
What you say?
No,
I don't. And so that's getting me to where I'm going with my question here in a second. So that's just out there, right? That the folks at Ancestry.com said that, my great-great-grandmother, Marie F. Frederick, was one of the first siblings, right? So that's out there. And then the crazy part is my parents went to that school, and they was all kind of at there and didn't know that was my mom people.
Wow.
And then obviously what always happens to us, and we kind of talked about it on Twitter, when the 610 or the I-10 rolled through that section of the 7th Ward, that school got knocked down.
Of course.
And so I'm sitting here, so I'm sitting there trying to figure all of this out. And so blessedly, right, the good sister Lisa Moore, who's the archivist at the
Amistad. Oh no.
Yeah, at the Amistad. She is at the Amistad on Tulane campus. She had granted me an appointment to go in and sit through Rivers Frederick's papers.
His papers are at the Amistad. They've been collecting a lot of good black collections. Oh, excellent.
So I'm gonna try to go back and connect the dots. Was Marie Frederick adopted? When was that school built? When did they knock it down? All that good stuff. So here's my question, brother. Here's my question. I got through all of that to get to my question.
I've been taking notes. That's why I'm looking down, man.
Here's my question, brother. After all those years and hours that we spent in the boxing, right? Yeah. Charles L. Boxing.
Yeah.
I had never got around to, I'm gonna do you right quick. I never got around to reading this until
Black Genealogy. No question.
Right. All the hours we spent there. I never got around to that, man.
I didn't see y'all hold up again. Y'all see the title. Charles Blockson. We were at Temple University at the time. The Charles Blockson collection is one of the great repositories of black art. It's one of the great black archives. Yeah, yep. You know, Charlie, you know, Gary. I worked for Charles Blockson. That's like a second father to me, man. So, and he's still kicking, still alive, still in Philly. There it is, Black Classic Press. Paul Coates strikes again.
Yes, sir.
The man.
And so,
yeah, go ahead.
All those hours you spent with Doc, did he give you any tips on those of us in a similar vein and those of us, other students who are going to take this up in narrative? Any tips? Any passions?
I think a brother who is really, and we could talk offline about. There's a brother here in D.C., James Morgan, who is hardwired. He's one of my former students. He's at Howard, but he's one of the brightest young genealogists that there is out there, man. This guy's, but it sounds like with your family, y'all have already kind of built the foundation and structure. James. And you know, Blockson talks about this too. All the black genealogists do, and then James is hardwired into the black genealogists. You know, they're very well organized. But I'll connect y'all, man. In fact, I'll make sure you get his number. But the professional associations, the social and civic organizations, like, was he a Mason, Scottish Rite, or Prince Hall? Was he in a fraternity?
Yeah. I gotta look through that. It didn't look like it. I think he was a Phi Beta Sigma. I think he was.
Okay, he may have been Sigma. Because I'm wondering. Because even Flint Goodrich, we didn't talk about this earlier, but the brother Claude Barnett was actually on the board of Providence, which was the black hospital in Chicago. But I'm saying for Flint Goodrich, and I know that there was a hospital. Dillard had a hospital.
Yeah. It was Goodrich, and the other one was oh man, I'm looking for it.
Wait, so Flint Goodrich, I'm trying to remember
there too.
Yeah,
Flint Goodrich and Sarah Goodrich, and then it merged into Flint Goodrich. Flint was a hospital, and Sarah Goodrich was a hospital.
Were either of those the ones connected with Dillard?
Yeah, they both were. Right?
Okay,
they both were, and they merged and became. What was connected to
you know what's interesting, and Professor Hunter Karen, you know because when you talk to Christian about his father, about Dick Gregory, one of the things that they didn't have time to deal with in the documentary, I Am Dick Gregory, when Dick Gregory ran coast to coast, he also did a fast in Louisiana, and he was at that hospital. Yeah,
he was.
Yeah. Dick, he bringing attention to these HBCU connected hospitals. I suspect, I said all that to say that, have you all begun to look at or through anything at Dillard?
That would be that's me going home.
Okay, that's how you got it. My man says that, me and Dr. Beatty, Mario, that's his man. In fact, he was the graduate chapter advisor for Alpha when they were at Miami University of Ohio. The president of Dillard, good brother.
Right.
So if there's anything at Dillard, Walter make sure his staff make sure you have it. Because I suspect that's where you're going to go. Because I don't even know where those records are presered. Does Homicide have them too?
No, well, I have to ask right now. All I know is they have the Rivers Frederick papers, but they probably do. They probably do, as I think about it, because they have a lot of that stuff. And Amistad was at Dillard at one point.
Yeah,
and they moved to Tulane for some reason.
Well, I didn't get the resources, man. That's the problem. The resources. Yeah. I don't think any of these repositories should be at white universities.
Me either.
But I would rather them be there with committed
than nowhere.
Right. So people say, well, where they gonna be? I'd rather have them than not.
I was literally stuck down the street from Dillard during Katrina. I was on the corner of Annette and Humanity. I was looking. I had a picture of me running across the street. Me and my cousins trying to pull leaves out of the street, not realizing levees blew and all of that kind of stuff. It was right across the street from a Dillard extension center that they had. Oh man, so I'll be there.
No, check that out. Another thing I would say is I'm assuming you all already got. I'm sure your aunties already got that. Your mom, your aunties got this. In addition to the civic associations, the church, obviously. He must have been a huge pillar And I would also check, I'm sure they've already done this too, but Chicago.
Yeah.
Because if he's at UFC, and I'm thinking this was, you say 1898?
Yeah, he was in. Yeah, he got out 1899. I think if I look at my notes, 1897. 1897.
How long?
He was the first AA. He was there for like 2 years, and then he had that 2.5 year or 1.5 year internship.
So they sent him north the year.
Yeah, he left. Yeah,
he left the year before Plessy. I'm just wondering in terms of the social structure and what's going on down there.
Oh yeah.
Did he dance on the color line? I mean, how was he able to navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, he was what we would call Creole.
That's right.
Where I got my fancy Negro last name from. He's a Creole like
that. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yes, sir.
Point Coupé, I mean, when you say Point Coupé, I immediately think of the rebellion of enslaved Africans in the 18th century at Point Coupé, which was like huge, Right. And so plantation culture, but for him to be in the city, then my question would become, where did his people come from?
Right.
Because it feels like he wasn't born into poverty.
Well, yeah, he was, and I got so nervous when we started chopping it up with your brother. He was born to a sharecropper on a plantation, Drouillard Plantation, 1874.
So that means his people. Well, then again, I guess they probably already started tracking that in Ancestry. His people are going to be in those plantation records.
Yeah.
In other words, if they're anywhere, they're going to be, because then I'm assuming then that they had been there for some time. Not just, I would imagine so. Not just into the Civil War, but maybe even generations before that.
Probably.
I'll tell you who could be of some help, and I'll connect you with her too. In fact, she just moved from Dartmouth College to the University of Chicago. Another one of my former students, brilliant sister, Rashana Johnson.
Okay. Rashana. You mentioned her.
Yeah,
I like to connect with her.
Yeah, she's from New Orleans.
Yes, sir.
She did her dissertation in her first book.
Yes, sir.
Slavery and the slave port in New Orleans, and then the influence throughout Southern Louisiana.
Nice.
So she might be able to help you in terms of where to go for the records to trace, just take them all the way back. You might be able to get back to the boat, man.
Hey, that's what's up. Trying to get back to and Professor Hunter. Just can I do one more thing?
Man, come on.
I'm coming. Real quick.
We chopped it up like we back in Philly.
So real quick.
Live show.
Right. Real quick. I'm sorry. Real quick. Right. So I never told you this, Greg. But I was a freshman at FAM, and our boy Eugene, Dr. Eugene Anderson, but back then kept telling me to come up to Temple. Come check it out. Gotta check it out. He lasted with me at FAM for 2 weeks. I finally hooked up with him. He convinced me to come on my spring break, right? So I got a pocket full of cheesesteak money, a pocket full of jazz club money, hitting up Warm Daddies, I guess it was.
Warm Daddies.
Reggae club money, right? And so I get to Temple. We go to class. It's in the fishbowl on the 8-4 Gladfelter. And we in the fishbowl, right? And you come walking in a dashiki and black boots and a blue jeans and your baseball cap to the back.
That was the Tim
drop
days.
Your book bag and you just set that thing off on fire. I don't even remember what you was talking about.
No.
My mouth was open half the time. I'm sitting in the back on spring break trying to act like I'm in college, right? I dropped my pen a couple times.
I remember that.
I don't even think I dapped you off though, because all I remember is getting to the elevator, running to the admissions office, and pulling the money out my pocket, trying to transfer on the spot.
What?
But brother, I love you. I thank you for that. Brother. And that probably was either the fall or spring of 1992 or 1993. I don't remember. I think it was 93. But I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, man.
From the bottom of my heart.
Is that class Kelly and all them was in?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I remember that, brother. No, I thank you, bro, because you have done, you went off, got that master's in Black Studies at Ohio State, then got the law degree in banana equation, intellectual warfare, and writing books and doing this work. It's an honor to be your brother, man. It's an honor to be in this position, man. I'm glad you dropped in.
For creating that space.
Yes.
All right.
Wow.
Yes. Thank you.
That's crazy.
Professor Garrick Faria. I'm going to make him a professor.
Yeah, no, Garrick is Garrick, them boys, them guys was in that class. That's my first class I taught at Temple after being at Ohio State. It's called Black Social and Political Thought. And they're everywhere now. Nate Thompson, who was assistant director down at Duke of the Mary Lou Williams Center. Kelly Harris, who is now the chair of African American Studies at Seton Hall. Up there in all those guys were freshmen, sophomores. Dave Norman, who was a principal in the Bronx, high school principal. Norm Bayard, who's down his youngest, his oldest son just went to college. He was a educator in Philadelphia. They were all 18, 19-year-old. I wasn't that much older than them, but it just goes, man.
But like, look, imagine how many people you're inspiring right now. To go do some things, and
we're together on this. I'm
just saying, all of us are challenged and charged to inspire.
Yes.
You know, because of you showing up the way you show up as your authentic self all the time. I love it. And Garrick, thank you for dropping those nuggets and helping people understand, you know, what the process is. And Dr. Carr with the solutions. We're going to be doing a lot of that, because for us, the stolen people, we have to piece together our history, and we got to know where we come from, and we got to understand the people you know, who gave birth to us, generations. That's why African Ancestry is important as well. .com. We're doing some things with them. So this is going to be fun. I'm looking at, you know, asking my mama questions, you know, about her grandmother, and I'm learning so much, you know, but that's the work that we have to do for the next generation.
Oh, yes. I gotta there was a brother who mentioned Carr took his granddaughters to the National Museum of African Art a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, and put on Twitter, because we had talked about it last week, and put on Twitter that said my granddaughter said what stood out to her was the black tablet showing a mark for every day Nelson Mandela was in jail. Yeah, that's from that black. There's an exhibit there called Heroes, and there's this whole side of the wall is black panels, and you just think it's black panels, and the closer you get, you see what looks like little rice marks. You say, oh, this is interesting, and then you get up on it, and the panels take up one side of the wall, and you think, and then you see the plaque. Each one of them little marks is a day that Mandela spent in jail. And so I'm sure she did. And when you step back and look at it, it looks like the stars in the sky, just straight. And then there are little black panels. I'm talking about wall-sized black panels going down there and little rice marks. And when you see that, it puts in perspective what we are talking about. And it puts in perspective that, in the words of Huey Freeman, everybody in jail is not Nelson Mandela. So we're not talking about the trial of R. Kelly today. If you remember the R. Kelly episode, what we are doing is distinguishing that some sacrifices were made because some people decided, I'm going to be on the side of justice for our people. And that doesn't make everybody in prison guilty. It doesn't make them all political prisoners, but it does mean that many of the people who have sacrificed, and we think about that during Black August, because there are people still in jail who have many more of those little marks than Nelson Mandela, like Mumia Abu-Jamal, like Jamil Al-Amin, these Russell Maroon Schultz. We have to remember them. And so, but I did make it down there only for about an hour. And I want to show y'all this because I know you're you know, back to school. They were back to school. So reading and writing, we know we began that. And people can dispute it. They can talk about Mesopotamia. Fine. We can get into that, or we can have that discussion. And it won't be an argument. We'll have a discussion in the narrative. But one of the more recent traditions of writing tradition, just like we're writing now, many of us with the English language, using the English language, writing in this 26 character script that we have, you know, there were a lot of Africans writing in Arabic because of the influence of Islam. And in that exhibit that I finally got a chance to go and see, and I showed y'all the exhibition catalog. I don't know what I did with it right now, but it's not important. The exhibition catalog for, here it is, caravans of gold, fragments, and time. That's Mansa Musa. The map, they have the map down there on display in the Smithsonian. But I want to end with this because I really wanted to see these. There was a brother in the 16th century named Ahmed Baba. Dr. John Clark used to always talk about Ahmed Baba, Ahmad. So Ahmed, I guess it would be. And sometimes you see it with an E. Baba al-Timbuktu. Ahmed Baba of Timbuktu. That's the short title of his name. It's a longer name. He wrote so many different books, and more than 60 books are attributed to him, a lot of it in jurisprudence. And so this is something that you don't get a chance to see a lot. It's in Northwestern University. There was a scholar named John Hunwick who's written a lot. In fact, I finally got my hands on this. This is one of the volumes, Arabic Literature of Africa, the Writings of Western Sudanic Africa. John Hunwick compiled this. This is a compendium, but he did another book on Timbuktu and the Mali Empire that has the actual documents in it. So I've read Ahmed Baba, who's one of the most learned scholars of his time. And in that exhibit, I got a chance to see, this is actually from the exhibition catalog. Those are pages from Ahmed Baba's, one of his treatises there. And they're on display now at the Smithsonian. So I know your granddaughters saw these. This is a treatise on ethics. He wrote one on ending the slave trade. This is in the 1580s and 1590s. And as we go back to school, and there are a number of different books. I think I've showed y'all the manuscripts of Timbuktu. There are a couple of very big books on the subject. And Hunwick's book, I couldn't dig that one out, but this is a good one if you want to get it. The Meanings of Timbuktu, which talks a lot about what that place was about. And this little one, 333 Saints, A Life of Scholarship at Timbuktu. The reason I bring this up, particularly for you young people, I'm talking about y'all who are in kindergarten or going to first grade, second grade, third grade, and it moves me so much to know that some of y'all are watching. When you go in there to school, you're not going alone. You are not going alone. You have Hortense's father. You got Professor Hunter's father. You have my father. You got every ancestor that we just heard Gary Faria talk about. You got Ahmed Baba. And the tradition, when you pick up that pen and write, and when you put your fingers on that keyboard and type, the spark that comes out of your mind through your fingers on that page and on that screen, you invented that. And if anybody try to tell you different, you send them to us. Or better yet, you ain't even got to handle it. You can handle it the way our tense daddy said. You better hope you don't run into somebody like me, because I'm here to set the world right back up where it's supposed to be. So y'all go on to school and do what you got to do. Understand you're not looking to anybody else for your validation. Your ancestors have already validated you. Yeah, I'm gonna stop with that.
I love you so much.
I love you. I love you too.
All right. Well, we won't be live next week, but we'll have something because it's the commitment to have something at noon on Saturday. So we'll do something. And Baba Dick Gregory.
Baba Dick Gregory. Well, they called him that too. Baba Greg.
The fourth anniversary of his passing into Independence, the 19th. So we're gonna keep having this discussion, and we have a lot of work to do over the narrative side. But I wanted to say thank you to you. Thank you to everybody wherever you are in the world. We got folk from as far as Poland and Africa. I saw Barbados this morning, Bermuda, all of these places. And let's say a special prayer for our folk in Haiti,
please.
Haiti. Yeah, y'all have the character and the strength to get through all of this. Even at 7.2, it just says 7.2 Richter scale earthquake. They can survive this, and they will, because they've survived worse. So let me just say thank you again. I love you. I will see you in the narrative streets.
I love you. I see you in the narrative streets. Be safe, y'all.